Hey everybody, and welcome to the new video. And this one I want to do a bit different than the others. I want to keep the channel really fresh and actually giving you new things to learn all the time. So I don't just want to follow the format of you seeing me complete a painting with some of it is sped up, some of it's at real time, and I'm just doing a voiceover all the time. That's great. But on this one I wanted to do, like I said, something a bit different. And what I'm going to do, rather than show you just a completed painting, I'm going to actually jump through it and pause onto a lot more real time on the things that I think is important for you to know about and also to learn. And the benefit of that then is that what I want you to be able to do is to take the principles and to create your own artwork, which you can then go out and sell and paint anything that you want rather than just copying. And obviously when you do, if you wanted to copy this, you can do it for your own benefit, for your own practice, but because my paintings are copyrighted, you can't then go on and sell them. So that's not the whole idea behind it. So what I want to do is to really concentrate more on creating fur texture and to make it look real and believable. So just briefly, what I've got here so far, as you probably know if you followed any of my videos, I've shown it time and time again, which is again why I don't want to repeat the same things. So I've got a canvas taped to my board, I've got the drawing done on there, I've sealed the drawing, and I've toned the canvas. Now I've got lots of videos on here showing how I do that, and also on my YouTube channel. So if you want to see the toning of a canvas, and I think I may even have one of this stroke painting on over on my YouTube channel. I do that lots of times, so there's no point me wasting your time going over it again. And what I'm doing now, I've got my alkyd oils over on the left hand side. You haven't got to follow that type of setup at all. I'm doing it specifically so that you can see the palette as I paint, because I know some of you like that. But normally you'd have a palette in your hand, or you'd have the palette by the side, or you could have it like this, because the benefit of having it by the side here is that you get to see the paints right by the painting. So totally up to you. And I've got alkyd oils on there. If you want to know the colours up the top, I think I've got ultramarine blue, cad red, alizarin crimson, burnt sienna, burnt umber, and lamp black. And then I believe that's a Windsor yellow, cad orange deep, cad medium, Naples yellow, which is one I always got on there, and titanium white. And all I'm basically doing is blocking in. As once again you will see this on loads of my videos in detail. And basically I'm putting in the underpainting, the undertone. Now when you're doing this, if it doesn't flow well, or it doesn't stick to the canvas properly, you know, it doesn't spread out on the canvas easily, I use a little bit of a medium. Now you can use liquid or walnut alkyd medium. The walnut one is by M. Graham, and liquid you can get everywhere, and they're just mediums that will thin the paint a little bit. So if your paint seems a bit thick and it's not spreading out on the canvas, just put a little bit of that in. Now as I said, I'm using alkyd oils. Now that means they're slightly different than normal oils, and the only difference is they've got something like a liquid, an alkyd medium, already in it, so they dry faster, much faster than normal oils. They dry by the next morning. That's a benefit for me because I paint in layers, and that means I can come back the next day and get cracking on the painting again. I'm not waiting all the time. So okay, so this is the underpainting stage. And as I said, I'm going to build up on it, and I'm going to jump through sections so that you can actually see more of the detail of building fur in real time. So this one, as I said, is a bit different than the others. This one is a real learning video more than a follow along video. So I'm going to carry along with this blocking in. So basically the thing to keep in mind with blocking in or doing the underpainting is to make it a little bit darker than you actually want the finished painting to be. So a shade or two darker. Otherwise your lighter strokes are not going to show up on top. So all you need to do is think about now the lightness and the darkness more than the colour. Try to get the colour right. So that's your colour mixing practice needs to come into play there. Try to get the colour quite close but darker. But remember, new layers are going to go on top, so you can always make adjustments and refine colour and tone a little bit. So I'm just going to carry on with the blocking in stage. Okay, now I've come back at this section because I wanted to point something out to you guys. When I do my critiques over on my Patreon channel, something I see all the time and something I have to comment on is that just because a fur is white fur, it doesn't mean it's white all the time. And by that I mean that when it's on the shadowy side, as in this section of the tiger, it's going to be influenced by other colours and also by the blue sky above and other shadowy colours. So as I say, in this instance it's a blue grey. Now you've really got to look out for these colours, especially in the white areas. Sometimes it can be difficult to see. So, you know, something I usually tell people, if you've actually printed out your reference photo and you're unsure of the colour, especially with white fur in the shadow areas, fold your reference photo down along its middle section so that the fold is cut in through the white part that you're trying to actually colour match. So what that gives you the advantage of is that you can then take that piece of paper over to your canvas. So in this instance, say I've got that fold going through the centre of this left eye as we're looking at it, I can put that onto my canvas right next to it and it'll show you instantly and easily the colour you need to be getting. And usually it's going to be a blue in the shadow area or greyed out blue as well. Now the reason I wanted to do this tiger was specifically because the left hand side as we're looking at it is really in shadow and the right hand side is not in shadow, so there's a real difference between the colours and the tones on both sides of the face. So remember to do that if you're struggling with a colour. The other alternative is going to Photoshop and use the colour picker, and I think I show that on my YouTube channel, and that will show you again you know, what the true colour is, not what you think it is. Now I've warmed up this colour. It's a nice yellowy colour in this inner section, and that's from bounced light. So even in a shadow area you can get warm colours. So the light may be bouncing off, perhaps there's a rock that's orangey in front of the tiger or an orangey floor. Perhaps the grasses are a real vibrant orange, but they're bouncing up into this white fur shadow area. So really pay attention to the colours, especially in shadows. Is what makes the difference between a good and a great painting. So as a brief overview, when I'm painting eyes, I generally try to get the basic mid-tone colour in. So I get that in, and usually I do it as quite a flat colour. Here I'm mixing up an orangey, kind of a subdued orange. Still got the flat brush. If both eyes are normally, well, if both eyes are round about the same colour and tone, I get them both in at the same time. That saves matching colours. So here I'm putting in a bit of the darks around the bottoms. I've already put in a small amount of the shadows, and then I start applying the lighter colours. So following my usual process of going from pretty much dark to light. You can see how those bounce lights on the bottom really punch that up. Then I'm getting the pupils in. I switch to a round brush for that process. So use a brush that actually suits the area that you're painting in. And then the highlights on top, which are a blue or greyed down blue, usually reflecting that light of the sky above. And then when I put in the real darks around the eye, you can see how it really makes them look much more dramatic and lifelike. So doing the left eye as we look at it, bringing some of that down into the fur. I've slowed it down on this section now just so you can see how I actually re-establish the darks on the right eye. So the tip here is when you're actually doing a painting, an oil painting, darks will sink in. They will become a little bit muted. That happens especially with acrylics. It's really noticeable with most brands of acrylics. and it happens not quite as much then with the oils, but when they dry they do sink in a little bit, so they need to be re-established. And if you've got a dried underpainting, so if this, say this eye was completely dry, so it dried overnight, and I wanted to bring that punchiness of the black back up, I could simply use a little bit of liquid or alkyd medium on my brush, just a small amount, and rub it over it, and the vibrance will come back. It's virtually oiling it out. So then you can judge your colours and your tones when you go back over it. You can see just that little bit of black gone back around there has really made it much more punchy. And then you can see the 5-minute video of me painting the actual eye on my YouTube channel. So there's no need covering that again. It'd be wasting your time because I've already covered that. And plus I've also got lots and lots of other demos on doing eyes. So that they show you the principle of painting eyes. So I'm going to start blocking in again, so that we can get more to, to the actual fur texture part, rather than just wasting all your time, because even on a video that's 2 hours long I can't show you everything, because this painting took me around about 7 to 8 hours in length. So if I did it all in real time at 2 hours per video, we're looking at 4 videos. So it's a long time for people to actually sit through, and what I want to do is to actually just slow things down and show you what I think are new techniques or critical techniques that I see lots of people making mistakes on and not actually getting a grasp of. So I'm going to continue this blocking in stage and come back then at more important sections. So just blocking in. So I'm just looking for the basic tones. As I said, I'm trying to go that little bit darker, but if for some reason I don't go dark enough, I'll just glaze it on top or put a second layer on top, so there's no pressure at all. I'm remembering, as I said, that most of these whites won't be white. They'll have some form of colour in there, or they'll be greyed out or something, but they won't be a pure white. I keep re-establishing the darks, the stripes, every now and again, so because I don't want to lose them completely. They're there to help me. They give in that shape and form I talk about so much, so I want to get them pretty much in the right position, in the right place. Moving the shape of my brush as well, or the angle of my brush, so it suits the area that I'm painting, so I'm not always holding it flat, and in fact I'm very rarely holding it flat as you would say, a painter's brush. So I'm moving the position quite frequently. I like the blocking in stage because things take shape really quickly. The detail stages, that's if you want to do detail stages on your paintings, but they take a lot longer and they're much more tedious really. So the blocking in stage, as you see here, even speed it up. I didn't spend that much time actually doing it, and it makes a big difference really quickly. And it also shows you whether or not a painting's going to work. If it's not going to work, you're going to see it in the blocking in stage. So I'm just getting those rusty colours in. So lots of burnt sienna, burnt umber. A little bit of lamp black in there as well every now and again. Or even a blue just to subdue it and grey it out. Quite opaque colours, so they're covering the canvas quite quickly. So you can see there the process of blocking in. I've just slowed it back down now so that I can talk a little bit about it. Basically, when you're blocking in, you want to use a slightly thinner paint than the thicker paint that comes on top. Now, in oil painting, they talk a lot about fat over lean, and it can seem quite complicated, but it's not. Basically, on your first layers, just put a little bit of odorless paint thinners into your paint mixes. So as you pull a paint out, so if, say for instance now you're doing this slightly purpley white, you bring out your white, a little bit of the red, a little bit of blue to make the purple, and just a little bit of paint thinners on your brush, just a little dab, and that makes the paint slightly thinner anyway, which is good because it'll cover a little bit better and a little bit more easier, and it's making it thinner. So that's thin. When you want it to be a little bit fatter, to follow that principle, all you do in your subsequent layers is use less thinners or no thinners and start to use a little bit more medium. But don't worry about this rule at all. In the 20 odd years I've been painting, I've never had one of my paintings fall apart or crack or anything like that whatsoever. I kept some of those 20-year-old paintings back where I put thick paint underneath the thin paint on top and nothing has ever gone wrong. So don't let that rule hold you back from actually painting at all, because some people get so concerned about it they actually don't bother doing a painting, they just give up. So but you know, naturally when you want to do the underpainting, you're adding a little bit of thinners. That's all you need to worry about really, and then carry on with slightly thicker paint on top. So I'm going to continue this blocking in process. Now I'll jump ahead a little bit to get to a more interesting section, something I can teach a little bit more about getting the fur correct view on this underpainting stage and actually using oils to your own benefit. Okay, so the advantage that oils have over acrylics, which to me is a massive advantage, is the fact that it stays wet for a little while. So all this section here on the left hand side is wet, and that means that I can put these lighter or darker tones in and just blend them together. So I just use my brush to actually go into the wet paint and kind of smoosh it all together, dragging wet into wet, and it really softens the effect, and that's what you generally want in an underpainting. Now you can make that go even greater by using a dry brush, like a bristle brush, or even try a soft-haired synthetic brush to just go over the top, and you can blur it all out and really soften it down. Now my big issue with acrylics is that it dries so fast, but not only does it dry fast, the actual time it takes from being wet to just slightly tacky, which means that you can't blend then, is obviously even faster. So you're talking, you know, just a few seconds sometimes that, you know, is starting to tack off and it's not blending fully, and that makes me rush when I'm doing a painting. And that's the reason usually, well, that's the reason why I stopped doing watercolors, because I had to rush to get the wet on wet effect and all that type of thing. So oils for me is a much more slower and relaxed medium, and you can do this subtle blending, or you can even just keep blending one tone next to another and blend it almost right out so it's perfectly soft, as soft as you can imagine. So here you can see that underpainting there is still completely wet. I only did it a few moments ago, and now I'm coming in with thicker paint and just dragging it on the top. So I'm in control with oils as to the softness and the subtlety. Now this is another reason why I say oils and pastels are very, very similar. I would have done this in exactly the same way if it was pastels. Now to get the softness with the pastels, all I've got to do is use a fingertip and blend one into another. With the oils I'm just using the brush and blending one into the other, and they kind of act, the paint and the pastels act very, very similar. The way it actually blends with the paint underneath or the pastel underneath, and you can use a harder touch to really blend it, or a soft light touch to just blend a little bit and soften it on top. So that's why all these videos, the oils and the pastels, it's applicable to both. You don't have to think just because you're doing oil paints and perhaps the video is a pastel one that is of no use to you, because it is, without a doubt. You're still learning about the tone and how to build layers on top. Now another area that lots of people struggle with, and is one I can relate to because for a long time I used to struggle with it as well, is this muzzle area. Now I know why people struggle with it. It's because you've got lots of small hairs. It's not like the, you know, the kind of mane, the long flowing hair on the left hand side that I've just painted as we look at it. That's quite easy to get, you know, to understand in your mind. But this muzzle area and the area under the nose, it's all filled with lots of fine hairs. Now where people go wrong, and where I used to go wrong as well, is that you're trying to paint every individual one of them. Now the way I approach it now, if I look at my reference photo, especially if I printed out the actual size that I'm painting it, which makes it that bit easier as well, and then sit back say 5 or 6 foot from it, and you see the general shape and tone. And lots of these haze, the individual haze, then kind of merge together and disappear into each other. And what I'm saying is, just because we know they're made up of thousands or tens of thousands of little tiny haze doesn't mean you've got to paint them all. And what we're after is a suggestion. Now oil paint is really good for that as well, because we can use larger brushes and get those larger brushes to just rough it in, and it'll give that effect of lots of little haze, of lots of bunches of haze. And when you've got the underpainting done, then you can come back perhaps with a rigger or a slightly larger or slightly smaller, flat brush, and put in some more of the details on top, and that'll give you the appearance that you're after, rather than going straight in with a rigger and thinking, right, I'm going to paint every one of these tens of thousands of little haze. It just looks really stiff, rigid, and doesn't work. So here you can see how I'm just concentrating on the tones, the lightness and the darkness, concentrating on the shape and the form, and I'm using that oil to its advantage again, blending them together. And you can see that muzzle area on the left as we look at it, it's starting to look quite realistic already. So remember, squint your eyes or blur out your reference photo so you can see just the main shape and form. The detail will come later, but what we want, shape and form and a nice softness so we can build upon it. Lots ask me about the brushes I'm using, what size they are, what type they are. With oils, it's kind of irrelevant. And I know that's probably not what everyone wants to hear, but as long as you've got a decent quality brush, and usually I'm using a bristle brush. The brand I almost always use is Rosemary & Co, just because I can get them so easily. She ships out daily. She'll ship to the USA, the UK, anywhere around the world. The prices are superbly reasonable and the quality is fantastic. So over the years I just keep going back to them. But there's nothing special. If you can't get Rosemary & Co brushes, you know, the other ones that you can get will suffice. The important part with the brushes is to make sure that you can get them to a chiseled edge. Almost all of the painting I do with a flat bristle brush in various sizes, so a large brush for larger areas and a small brush for the smaller areas. And it really doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. So don't be one of these artists, like I know I was at the beginning, searching out for the magic brush. With watercolour, you've got to pay out the big money because the brush really counts. With oils and acrylics, it doesn't matter half as much. As long as it's a decent brush, then it's not the brush letting you down. If it's something that you can't do and you've got a decent brush, it's your technique. So don't be dragged into buying lots and lots of different brushes. So now I'm just re-establishing the darks. Now because the underlayer wasn't too dark or wasn't too opaque, I can still see my underdrawing, my undermarks through it. So I've still got that map to follow. So now I'm just darkening these back up, re-establishing them because I'll come back into them later on. Now another area people struggle with a lot is the nose itself. You know, it's kind of a strange colour. So when you're mixing up your colours, what I've done, I've created kind of a little laminated swatch. So what I've done, I've got a piece of paper, you can see it there, I printed it roughly the colour that I've told my canvas. So I've gone into Photoshop and then laminated it on a little A4 laminator, and that means I can put it in, I can do the colours and then put it next to my screen or my printed reference, and I know that I'm close because the nose is a bit strange. You know, you've got all these browns and whites around it, then all of a sudden you've got this orangey colour, which can kind of be hard to match. So that little tip of getting that piece of paper, so if you use it white, then it's not really going to work for you, because the tone you're going over is more of a mid-tone. Yep, that colour that we put on to actually tone the canvas, or burnt umber. So you want the paper to be roughly that colour. It doesn't have to be perfect, just roughly, so that you know the paint will behave the same way on the canvas as it is on the colour matching bit of paper. Now I've laminated it simply because I don't want the paint to soak into it, and also so that I can just wipe it clean and use it perhaps for another section. So once I've mixed up my paint, I just put that little dab on the edge of it, hold it up against my reference, and then I can adjust it until it's pretty close. And the colour I'm after is a mid-tone colour. It's the general colour of the nose, because then I can go into it with darks and also go into it with light that's really going to make it much more realistic. But you've got to start somewhere, and a mid-tone colour like this is a great place to start. So you can see now I'm putting some burnt umber, burnt sienna in there, darkening that mix down. I haven't cleaned my brush. I don't clean my brush often at all. A little bit of cad red just to redden it up, so we've got a nice dark red. Now I can go in and start shaping and forming that nose structure up. Wet and wet. So using the advantage of the oils again, because it's all blending perfectly. No rigid sharp lines coming out. So looking at my reference a lot as well. So I'm not just painting blindly, as I say on some of my videos. Don't go on autopilot. I'm really looking for the structure, because that's what's going to make the difference with the nose. You see a lot of amateurs do noses and they just look out of place. They just don't look believable at all, and it's because you've got to get the lights and the darks in the right sections. So I'll just speed this up now so you can see how it progresses. So just refining that shape a little bit more. So adding white now to my highlights. Remember I said I usually go for a Naples yellow, but with the nose I want it to have a pinkness to it, a solid look. White is very opaque and it's going to make that reddy colour go more pink. It's critical to get the darks in the right position as well, because that's really going to give that shape and shadow area. Now if you've got a print out of your reference, say you're doing a cat or a dog, you know, get the print out really close then to the actual area that you're painting, so you only got a glance from side to side. I'm working from a screen, so it's right by the side of me, but you know, quite far to the left. But what I've done, I've actually zoomed in a lot, but it's still not as good as having a print out right by the side of the area that you're working in. So I'm using a smaller round synthetic brush there now, just getting that darkness over the top of the nose. And then some slight blue in the actual nasal area, the holes, because it's actually reflecting some of the moisture that's glistening in there. The chin is another part people find quite tricky, and the reason is they don't put the dark layer in first. So that's what I'm doing here. You've got to get that dark in, or you cannot get the light of the chin on top. So it's worth getting it in, and you can see I've got a fairly small brush because I'm also altering the shape of the mouth. I'm cutting into it to get the shape of that mouth right, and I'm putting this dark area down much further than I need it, because it's easy with oils to actually just put light over dark. Same with pastels, super easy, the light goes over the dark. With coloured pencils, you've got a problem, light doesn't go over the dark. So that's why I like pastels especially over coloured pencils, and it's why I like oils as well, and that's why they are, as I keep saying, so very, very similar. So I've got those darks in, and it looks a bit strange now. It looks like the mouth perhaps is open and hanging down a bit, but it's not. That's going to be that area where you get lots of dark spots and that on the chin section. And now I've made up a nice purple colour, blue, red, a little bit of black to subdue it, and white of course, and that's the shadow area underneath the chin. So once again it's white fur, and again it's anything but white. Keep your eye open for these things. I'm working wet into wet, everything there is still wet, and see how I can put that blend in there. I'd struggle to do this with acrylics. I'd be fighting against it because it would want to be drying all the time. If you definitely want to use acrylics, and I can't persuade you to try alkyd oils, try a slow drying medium in there. And you may have to try out a couple of different types before you get one that you think suits you, and possibly the best way then is to put it into the main mixes, so into the actual raw colours when you squeeze them out on the palette, so you know you've got an equal amount of the slow dry medium in all of your mixes and you don't have to keep adding it all the time. You can see I just added a little bit of black, doing that blending wet into wet, and it's automatically creating the fur texture because I'm brushing it in the direction of the fur growth. You see, watch how I'm doing it, side to side into the fur direction. It's automatically creating fur. Now you're going to struggle doing that with acrylics. And I also don't want everything to be hyper realistic and super detailed. The centre of interest is the eye area, as it almost always is in wildlife. Portraits like this, the eyes, that's where I want most of the detail. As it's going away and out from there, I'm going to reduce the detail. So I've made up a nice bright thick white or whitish colour, and I can show you now how I go about getting more of that texture on this muzzle, and more importantly on the actual chin itself. So everything's still wet, so I can do that blending in the fur direction, quite a light stroke, pulling out into the section of the shadow area underneath the chin, so I'm dragging into it. So the chin itself at the moment is smaller than I want it to be. I've deliberately put that dark up higher under the chin, cutting into the chin shape so that I can drag it back out, creating the softness to the fur that's flowing from the chin. You see what I mean now as I bring it, as I start developing it. And look, even though that black is wet, it's completely wet, a light touch and I can still overlay. I want there to be some blending. I don't want hard edges, so that's why I'm doing it wet and wet. When you want a hard edge on something, that's when you let it dry first. And I want softness now. Load in the brush, plenty of paint, put it in and drag it down. Soft touch. These are not the details, this is still the underpainting, so it's still darker. I'm going to come back in and do the rigger brush eventually to get out and to bring out the fine details, the individual clumps of hair. But now I'm after that general shape and I want that softness. Look how I've created that lovely soft look at the bottom of the chin. Just blending it in there. The paint does it naturally. And then I can adjust the colours a little bit and come back in, still working wet and wet. Now with alkyd oils I can do this on a particular section probably for about an hour before it starts to tack up, so it generally gives you plenty of time to play around with things and to blend areas. So I've gone a bit lighter, And look, I'm using that stroke again, side to side, just going in the third direction. I'm letting the actual reference photo dictate the way the brush is going to move. You see, and I can put dark in again. I can refine it. I can go light to dark, dark to light, and get the shadowy areas in as well, and make it as soft as I want it to be. Darker still. And notice as well, my hand is well back from the bristles of the brush. I'm not after detail at all, and it pays then to sit back and to hold the brush quite far back as well. Stops you being too detailed, too rigid in your strokes. So these are the important things that you don't always see on videos if they're speeded up too much. The actual strokes that's going in. That's why I wanted this one to be more of a tutorial rather than a demonstration. So we're not going to end up with a finished painting that I want you all to follow, but ideas. Perhaps you only want to sketch out just the chin area and practice that, or just the eye area and practice that. That way, rather than spending 10 hours, or perhaps if you're inexperienced, something like this could take you 20 hours. If you just practice smaller techniques, you can improve a lot quicker. You see that area, it's all still wet. It's all still easily blendable. And I'm making sure I'm going dark enough. As I said, if I don't go dark enough, I can't put the lights on top. But with alkyd oils or oils, not everything is lost, even if you don't go dark enough, because you can glaze on top. And that'll be the theme for a whole new video where I show you all about glazing, because it's another subject, another area people get very confused with and overcomplicate it, and I'm all about making things as uncomplicated as possible. So I'll have to do a whole video on that, on glazing. So just re-establishing the darks. And you can see now, to soften it, I can drag that into the wet paint very easily, creating a softer edge. Or I can use straight paint and then go back in to really darken it and punch it up. So I've lightened the mix up slightly again. You can see I'm going back in again, so I'm adding layer upon layer onto a wet layer. So you don't have to wait for layers to dry before you put another layer on top. What you don't want to do is to let it dry for about 2 or 3 hours and it for all to be tacky, and then you're trying to put a layer on top, because it just won't work. But when it's all still wet, you can just keep layering and layering. You'll know the point when you can't layer no more, because it just doesn't seem to be working. It becomes muddy and difficult to work with. So you can see now I'm using longer strokes when I want longer fur. I can really make the shape and form that I want. I can, watch that you don't go autopilot now and actually start putting in those regimented lines. They all should be in slightly different directions. But look how easy and nice and soft the appearance is in these oils. So remember, you can do a layer onto a layer of wet paint, and that's the beauty of oils. That's where you struggle with acrylics more. Nice chiseled edge on my brush. And I can do many strokes as well before I've got to reload that brush. An area I knew would be fairly challenging on this tiger is the back of the neck, where it's really being lit by extreme sunlight. So it's a very, very vibrant orange. The sky will be blue, so it's the complementary colour, so it's really going to make it zing. So that's another thing that attracted me to this particular tiger. So I've made up, you know, kind of the mid-tone again. I've not gone too bright and I've not gone too dark. When you want a very vibrant colour, you don't want a real dark underpainting, so you don't want to go too dark to try and build that vibrancy on top, because it's going to mute it too much. So here I'm going kind of middle of the road, and it all looks a bit strange at the moment until I start to get the lights and the darks in. I'm just blocking in pretty much a real flat colour. A little bit comes down on that section too. The face is dry now, so you can see I'm using my marl stick to rest my hand on the dry underpainting. And then it goes a little bit lighter at the top. Naples yellow is a great colour for tigers. If you'd use white, then white makes things go, or has the habit of making things go a little bit pinky and cool. Naples yellow is more of a yellow, as the name suggests, so it keeps it slightly warm. So I'm just dabbing along with this colour. Now I've mixed this colour, I might as well use it where pretty much where it's seen on the reference. Just roughly blocking it in. A couple of little sections by here as well, and that'll all be adjusted later anyway. So now I can add some burnt sienna and burnt umber to that mix. So I'm darkening it up now, getting the darks in there. Fairly large flat bristle brush, chiseled edge. You can see how sharp that brush is when you chisel the edge, so you don't need to go using you know, fine head round brushes or anything at all for probably 90% of the painting. Using it on the edge to give that fur appearance. So I'm making up a little bit more paint. Now dragging down into that already wet paint. So you can see now how that vibrant orange is still showing through, it's still shining through. And I can continue that technique then over the top of the neck and the head area as well. Now I've already got a video on my YouTube channel where I'm working from dark to light, and that's what it's called, that's the title, and I concentrate for a good say 5 or 10 minutes on just painting the dark to light on this ear section. So if you wanted to look at the detail of that, you can see that on my YouTube, so there's no point going over that again because it is quite detailed. On this next section I'm going to be working on more of the bottom left area of fur, so it's quite a few different textures in here, and once again I want a base colour in there, so I've made up this muted brown colour. And if you want to mute the colour, I've said in a few videos, look on your colour wheel, it's worth printing one out, and then look for the colour opposite the colour, so the complementary. So the complementary of an orangey red would be a blue, so then you put in the blue to grey that colour down. And that's what I've done here. Looking across to my screen with my reference image on the left, and if I see that colour somewhere else, I'm not wasting it, I'm going to put that in as well, so there's a little bit on this right side. Notice on that right side as well, can you see where the blue has actually come over onto the tiger section? I've actually deliberately put it over too far, and that's so that I'm never butting one line up against another. I don't want a hard edge, so I'll go over that when I do that section. So just roughing the colour in. And this roughing in can actually wear brushes out fairly quick as well, so that's another good reason not to have too expensive a brush, because you do actually give them a bit of a beat in, to be honest. So checking that colour out. Is that light enough or too dark? And if I'm happy with it, I can keep going. So doing more in that sweeping motion. So getting that soft fur wet and wet again. It's really important to utilize that with oil painting. It's the main benefit we've got by using oil, so we can do the wet and wet, we can easily create softness. And I'm squinting my eyes as I'm looking at the reference, so I'm taking out all the little tiny details. I don't want to be distracted by all those little fine hairs I can see on the photograph. I'm looking mainly at the actual clumps of fur. And you notice my mix as well. I'm never completely obliterating a mix. I'm never mixing into the same section. I'm coming off to the side of it a little bit, and that leaves lots of different colours. So after about 10 or 15 minutes painting, I've got lots of colours to pick from. So this area I know I want to be a little bit richer and a little bit darker as well. And spend the time that's required mixing the colours. Don't just rush in. Sometimes a mix can be quite tricky as well, and you may have to take, a few goes and use a little bit of a laminated piece of card that I did again then. You just saw me put it on there. If I'm struggling a little bit to find the colour, then I can do that, and I can see I wanted it a bit redder according to that, according to the screen. I could hold it up against the screen. I thought, yep, it needs to be a little bit redder, and then I can adjust it some more. Put it on that little bit of a laminated piece, check it out again, and see if that's closer to it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Very, very rarely are you looking for the perfect colour. It's the lightness and the darkness that really makes the realism, rather than those perfect colours. Darken it very slightly, greying it out. Just a tiny bit of blue. And blocking that in. Now you can see I'm resting the marl stick end on the muzzle of the tiger, so that's all dry, so that dried the day before. Now if I was using regular oils, that section could easily take 2, 3, 4, 5 days to dry. Different colours in regular oils dry at different rates as well. So that's a benefit for using the alkyds. That's why I always recommend people start off especially with alkyd oils. So going into that mid-tone now with a darker colour. Not painting over everything. I'm painting the shadowy areas. And there's never really a right or a wrong way. You can do this in lots of different ways. You can work from dark to light, or get the mid-tone in and work middle and then go darker and then put the lights on. The only thing you really don't want to do is start with the lights. Any of the other ways will work. So lightening the mix up. Checking my colour. A little bit of alizarin crimson. Ultramarine blue. And a little bit of white off to the side. And I'm not concerned if I go too light. As long as it's not too crazy light and too far out, I'm not concerned if it's too light, because as I said, I can always glaze and tone that down later. And what I decided to do was to try and get these stripes in, because they've actually, you know, been pretty much overpainted and they've been lost, and they need to be quite dark in this section. So before they are lost completely, I'm going to re-establish them just with some black and a little bit of brown in there as well. So I'm just going to paint these in rather quickly in the fur direction of the growth. And then with that, those dark stripes painted in, I can use that lighter mix so everything's still wet, and I can go in and start to add a bit more of another layer, so a bit more detail to this fur, the lighter sections. So I can drag into the dark and I can drag the dark into the light as well. So really adding some texture into it. Keeping that chiseled edge on my brush. Using quite a light stroke as well. You can clearly see how it's mixing as well with the paint, the wet paint underneath. So I was keeping it all quite subtle. It's more of the clumps of fur again that I'm looking at. I can just do a little bit on this section as well. And that'll all work quite well as the underpainting. Darkening that mix down. Black is a great paint to actually use with other mixes. Not very often I really use it on its own as a straight black. I'm just going to make up a little bit of a brown mix as well. So I can just put a nice soft suggestion of where this shoulder or leg area actually lives by here. And that's just a nice soft suggestion of it there. I don't want a hard edge at all.